Thanks everyone for joining. This is Ravi Pinto. I'm a product manager with Oracle's integration team. And what I want to do today is to give you an idea of how Oracle integration enables you to integrate and access data and leverage popular SaaS and data sources. In this particular session, I will be mostly focusing on a live demo to show you a particular use case that helps you in achieving this. But mostly, I go into the demo, I want to set some context. Now, oftentimes in your project, you would have requirements where you have to integrate or bring inside in your application some particular data source. And this data source is not necessarily just a database. Of course, it can be a database like an Oracle database or a Microsoft SQL Server. But also think about the web services that are available. So for example, data can come as an open data for, like Singapore government hosting data.gov.sg. And that's available as a REST API. If you want to use those data sets, then typically what you would have to do is write an application. The application programming language would provide you with a library. That library will essentially give you certain operations and methods to use this particular data set. However, if there is some change that happens in terms of the URL, in terms of the data format, etc., you have to go and fix that application again, etc. There are other data sources. We are seeing more and more of Apache Kafka, for example. We are seeing adoption of secure FTP servers, RPAs, robotic process automation like UiPath. And of course, there are a ton of SaaS that are available. Oracle Fusion is one example, Salesforce.com, Workday, etc. are some more examples. Not just this, but your customer might still have on-prem ERP applications, SAP, for example, or eBusiness Suite. And you may have to pull data from there or do certain operation. For example, whenever your website is able to capture a new order, your e-commerce site, you need to pass it to eBusiness Suite on-prem. And that requires you to integrate. And not necessarily all of these applications are available as REST APIs. They have their own protocols, even if they are available. So there are, of course, a lot of headaches then when you are managing applications. Let me illustrate this with a simple example. Assume you want to upload some data into the ERP cloud. This is the Oracle ERP cloud. Now, the typical steps that you have to do go something like this. You have to fetch data from the source. Now, this could be a file that you have, or this could be an application that is generating data, for example, a website or an intranet site. Then you have to encrypt this file. So this particular file cannot really be sent to ERP without. You have to put this particular file in a particular place. So you can't just make an HTTP REST call into ERP cloud and submit data. No, it has to go through certain steps. So the first step is to put it in the universal content management system that is part of the ERP cloud. Now, the file that you have prepared, and by the way, this file is a formatted file. It has a specific format that you have to follow before you even encrypt and put it into UCM. Otherwise, the file will be rejected. Now, once you've put into UCM, stored there, right? So the file gets UCM, then you have to schedule a process. Now, what does this process do? It will pick up the file from UCM and it'll decrypt it and it'll bring it to the staging tables within ERP's general ledger. Now, that is just one part. It is not because it is in staging. From staging, it now needs to go into production set of tables. And for that, you have to schedule one more process. Once these processes are done, once they are completed, you still don't know what the status is. You could have submitted, for example, 96 records. And now you want to know out of those 96, how many were successfully processed and how many were not, because then you have to resubmit these transactions. These are financial transactions, so you can't lose any one of them. Well, for that, you have to configure a callback. So ERP Cloud gives you a callback mechanism, which means that you need to have an endpoint in your application to receive the callback. This callback holds the status of the process that has been just run. And what it essentially will give you of what was successful and what was not successful. So you need to loop through that data and figure out the status, and then do needs to be done to fix the original problem. And of course, this has to be iterated because your application in the front end can change. The process that's running in ERP, your finance may mandate something new that needs to be added over there. That can change, and every time these changes happen, you have to spend to do this, this whole process again. Well, consider this: instead of doing all, we were to give you a tool that enables you to connect to ERP Cloud. Connected, just go and pick up this particular pattern or this particular business operation, which is import bulk data in. And what exactly is the operation that you want to do? So you want to import journal entries. And if you want journal entries, all you need to then provide is a callback URL in your application where ERP Cloud can give you all the details and get. We encrypt the data file for you. The tool encrypts the data file for you. The tool ensures that it is put into the content management system. It also ensures the actual processes that are required to process this data correctly. So what I want to talk to you about is Oracle integration, and I hope this particular background gives you enough information of the capability of the tool. Now, before I give you more details of what this particular tool does, these are the focus areas for Oracle integration. Our focus is developer productivity, which means we want to get you up and running with an application or with a data source as quickly as possible so that you can focus on delivering the overall solution rather than tearing your hair apart of how to integrate or how to bring data from this particular data source. We have a lot of pre-built connectivity, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll demo that as well. And not just that, but of course, from an operation reliability and scalability perspective, we provide you various tools that help you operate this very efficiently. And we also give you real-time visibility, which you can share with the business in terms of what's the real effect of integration. Particular product, four main capabilities, which is the application integration. That's what I will show you a demo of. We also have capability or a feature called Visual Builder that enables you to quickly create UI UX for these applications. Not just this, but if you need to interact with human element, which means if you have human workflow, then we have process automation. And as I mentioned, to give you a complete business-based insight of how these integrations are actually helping business metrics, gather business metrics for you, then that's insight. There's a ton of pre-built connectivity. We have adapters. We enable you to do B2B transactions. We've created something called recipes that are pre-built integration flows that you can directly import into this particular tool and start off. And of course, we integrate with RPA, vendors such as UiPath and Automation Anywhere. We also underneath use a lot of what the OCI, the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, has to bring to table. So API gateway, for example, if you want to expose the integration flow as an API via the API gateway, that's available. What the API gateway then does is it gives you policies to be applied to these particular endpoints. And that becomes very important when it comes to opening up certain functionality within your application. You want to control how much of interactions or how many requests are incoming. You probably want to throttle them. You probably want to find out that they are authenticated and authorized users of your APIs. So these are some of the features. And as I mentioned, from a connectivity perspective, we have adapters, and I'll show you what these adapters are capable of doing. But here is part list of the sort of adapters we have. And as I mentioned to you in the slide earlier related to ERP Cloud, these adapters not only enable you to connect to applications, but they are actually able to do much more. They bring the functionality of application to you, such as importing bulk data or running certain reports, etc. So if you look at the list of connectivity connectivity features or adapters that we have, you will see we connect to ERPs, and not just Oracle's ERPs, but we also have connectivity to SAP, Shopify. We have connectivity in HR side to SuccessFactors, Workday. We connect to ServiceNow. We connect to all sorts of databases, all sorts of enterprise messaging, infrastructures. Of course, we have REST and SOAP adapters out of the box, so you can always connect to these web services. We have connectivity to RPA, and we have connectivity to a whole lot of productivity and social applications. So without much ado, what I will do now is get into a demo. This particular demo will focus on showing you a particular sort of use case that you probably come across all the time. Now, in this particular use case, what we are going to do is we are going to interact with a subscription management that's running as part of Oracle Engagement Cloud. So Oracle Engagement Cloud was earlier called Oracle CX or Oracle Sales, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, etc. And what we are going to do is we assume that you have a web application that's represented by Oracle Content and Experience. It can be any framework. Of course, Oracle Content and Experience is one of the frameworks to build a web application and rich experience, but this can be anything. And essentially, you need to interact with subscription management. So let's understand what exactly is this particular context. So you have built an application, and this application does management of subscriptions for the user front end, right? So you may have a mobile application or you may have a web application where users come and they look at what subscriptions they have. They can add subscription, they can delete subscription, they can change subscriptions. However, what the customer now wants you to do is to pass this data into Engagement Cloud. And that is essentially because all the subscription management from a customer perspective, your customer perspective, is being actually done over there. So what you can do is you are able to generate JSON or data in JSON format. You are able to make REST calls from your application. Of course, you have no idea of how Oracle Engagement Cloud works. You don't want to know it. It's not required. But you want to be successful in doing that, because then it increases the visibility with your customer of your capability, right? So let's look at how exactly we will do this. And to do that, what I'll do now is I'll stop my share and let me share my entire desktop, so that, or rather my browser, and I will show you how we are going to do this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is log into my integration application. When I log into this particular application, you will see here there are a variety of features. Now, I'm not going to go into every one of these features, but remember I talked about recipes. So you can look at recipes right on top here. So for example, employee onboarding. This is a recipe that has predefined integration flows between HR application, identity application, etc. And that's what is being shown here. There's also a summary of how many integrations are there, how many messages it has processed, etc. A list of accelerators and recipes that you can deploy, recent application or activities that is related to me. So let me go into integration. Okay. So let's focus on integration over here, even though there are other capabilities that we are not going to talk in this session. Here, integration is essentially integration flows. And these are various integration flows that I have built. I can also look at what other folks have built, and you can see all these various integrations that have been built. And once we do the demo, you'll get more idea about it. Now, you remember we talked about connections, or rather the adapters. And this particular table or this particular feature is what enables me to connect to these backend applications. It's pretty simple. I just click on create. So let's say if I want to connect to Apache Kafka, I pick that particular adapter, I give it a name. And when I go into the next page, I need to specify what is the bootstrap server. So this is where the Kafka endpoint will be provided. And depending on which sort of application you're connecting, so this is specific to Kafka connectivity of how you specify the username, password, or other credentials. And once you're done that, you could just test and or rather save and test your connection. So let me show you one that has already been created. So for example, here I have Engagement Cloud. And what you will see over here is I've provided the Engagement Cloud, the URL. And in this particular case, we are using username password token that has been provided over here. But of course, there are other ways like OAuth, for example, to connect to this particular this particular cloud service as well. If you want to invoke a REST adapter, that's fairly simple. And let me quickly show you one. So all you need is REST, select that. And what I need to just specify here is what's the connection type. So I'm going to give API-based URL, and I will provide this particular URL that I already checked. And once I've done that, I can also specify what sort of authentication is required. Now, in this particular case, there is no security policy, so I can just go ahead and save this. Once I save it, I can test it. So it was successfully tested, and that is, my REST connector to the Singapore open data source. That's open data sets that are available. Now let's look at our integration flow specifically. What I'll do is I'll create an integration from scratch. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is use something called AppDriven Integration. What this essentially means is there will be, your application will call a REST endpoint. So you have, remember, you have created a subscription website. Your application will call a REST API and provide some data, JSON data. And what this particular integration flow is then going to do is go ahead and create, that, or update the subscription data in the engagement cloud. So I'm going to call this as already done some of these, so I'm number. And of course, you can specify some details over here. So let's. Okay, so this is the canvas that you essentially get to see, and this is where you will visually create the integration. And what I mean by that is as simple as this. I can first go ahead and data that we are going to process is going to be coming into integration as a REST call, we will first have a REST interface that accepts the incoming data. So all I need to do here is this as update bill lines. Go next. So of course I can provide what operations have to be done, but more importantly, it's asking what is the endpoint's relative resource. Now I have that here already, and I'm going to use that. Okay, let's look at this. So the relative resource is going to be /subscription products /bill lines and then subscription product PUID as a parameter. What does this mean? What it means is when you call the REST interface, you will provide the subscription product PUID as part of the REST URL. And as part of the body, you will provide the JSON data that actually needs to act upon that. And since this is going to be an update, I can go ahead and pick up the patch verb support. So see how easy it is, right? All this code otherwise has to be written by hand. You can, of course, use a library, but over here, it's all visual. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say configure a request payload for this endpoint. And the same endpoint can also provide the response back, right? So you call the REST API in a synchronous mode. You provide me the JSON data. This will do the processing. It will update the engagement cloud, and then it will send a success message back to you. So let's go next. Now, what you will see over here is because we've specified this particular resource URI, it has automatically picked up the template parameter. It has set up a data type for it. Of course, you can change this, but we are going to keep it as string because that's how the data is going to come in. We go next. Now, remember, you are able to send JSON data. So we are going to change this payload format to JSON sample here. And we go ahead and provide a JSON sample. So again, I have this already, and I hope I'm picking up the right one here. Okay, no. Let me go and, so this is my JSON sample. And I go ahead and click OK. So as soon as I do that, you will see here that the media type of request body has been now set to JSON. Now the same thing I will do for response. So if you see over here for response, I go ahead and make this change as JSON sample. Now see that right now, because it doesn't have a sample, it has set the response body to XML, but we'll soon change that. Our back is going to be similar. We're not going to make this change. This is just a demo. But from the perspective of your project, you could do various other things. Now, as soon as I have done that, you see here that the media type of the response body has changed. So let's go. This is done. And what I have done now is basically have an endpoint which will get the subscription product PUID as the resource URI with the JSON body as the data that has to be updated. Okay, let's change the layout here to horizontal so it's easier for us to check. So as soon as this data comes in, there's going to be some mapping done, and then it is going to call the engagement cloud and then do the return back. Now, there are obviously some things that are not correct here. First of all, the data that is going to come is going to be probably multiple records. So we need to handle that, right? To handle that, what I'm going to do is add a step here. And I'm going to use a pattern which is for each. Now, obviously, you would have done this in your programming language. So this is a concept of iterator. What we are going to do is we are essentially going to use this particular bill line as the data around which we have to do the looping. So the repeating element is here. I, of course, need to give it a name. So of the step. And I need to have an iterator. Now, as soon as I do that, you see the orchestration has changed a little. Now there is a for loop. There is still the mapping, and then there is this. But of course, I'm being shown a warning over here, which is basically saying that there is no action to execute. So obviously, I need to add that. Now, this action is going to be interaction with the engagement cloud. So basically, for each of the lines coming in that has this particular data, I need to go into engagement cloud and update it. So let's, and hopefully the demo works well. I pick up, right? So this particular adapter here is giving me 3 different ways of interacting with engagement cloud. I'm using the REST resource because this is the customization within the engagement cloud. But otherwise, I can use engagement cloud business objects or services that are available out of the box. So if I look at service application, there are actually 3 of them. Sorry, but I need to use the CRM REST app and to interact with something called the subscription products. Now, even within subscription products, I don't want all of the data. So I'm going to pick up a child resource. And that child resource is something called the bill lines. Now, if you see, even bill lines has multiple data items, but that should be good enough for us. And we are going to do an update of the bill lines because that's what our use case is. So we go next. Okay, what we have done here. Remember that you are sending me JSON data, or we are sending Oracle integration actually JSON data. You could be sending multiple records. Each of these records has to be processed. And for each one of these records, I have to make a call into engagement cloud. And that is what this particular for each essentially does. So now you see my orchestration has been updated. There is a for each bill line. I have to do some data mapping. Then I call the engagement cloud. Then once this for each is done, I map the entire result set back to the response that is going to be sent back to your invoking application. So let's look at this mapping now, because this is incoming JSON. I have to map it to data elements within the engagement cloud. Now, usually this is a very difficult exercise. What I mean by that is you need to know each one of your source element, which you obviously know, but you also need to know what's the engagement cloud data elements. Well, integration has something called recommend. So if I click on this recommend, what you will see is it looks at the data elements from the source and recommends certain mapping to the target. Okay, now let's see what it has done. What it has done here is the template parameter, which is remember the REST endpoint that you're going to call with the subscription product PUID. It has mapped that particular PUID to over here, something called the ID 0, which is fine. But what it has also done is it has done request wrapper bill line PUID to something called bill line PUID. Well, I'm not interested in that one, so I'm going to deselect that. But the rest of it, the JSON data, the JSON body, you see the bill line PUID and the usage quantity is being sent, which I'm fine with. So I'm going to apply these recommendations. And once it has been done, I can go ahead and validate. That's successfully validated. I can go ahead and close this. The validation is typically done because while I have shown you an example where the data is mapping directly to the target data, there might be use cases where you need to use certain functions. So for example, let's assume all the name is coming in uppercase and you need to convert it to lowercase, or you need to add 2 particular fields and create a value that needs to be put into target. All these things can be done within the data mapping. Of course, I'm not going to go into that particular detail, but you can definitely explore that. Now, as soon as I have done the mapping, you see that this has become a solid color circle. Now I need to do the same for response. So let's do the editing of response. And again, what you will see over here is recommendation. I can go ahead and click on recommend. Okay, so let me do that again. Now, what this will again do, just like for the request, it also does for response. And of course, it has found many more of the mappings, but I'm not interested in all of them. So I'm going to deselect some of them. I'm of course interested in these, the request wrapper, but I'm definitely not interested in this and neither in this. So what we are going to do is we have mapped the request wrapper, meaning the incoming data's bill line PUID, and the usage quantity to what is coming as response. I'm going to apply these recommendations. I'm going to validate them. And I close this. So what we have now is our integration flow is almost ready. I say almost because if you see over here, there is a one big red item, but also there are a couple of other things for us to do. So let me recap. Your application invokes a REST URL that I will provide, or that your Oracle integration will provide. For the incoming data has two parts. One is the resource URI with the subscription product PUID, and then the JSON body that contains the actual data to be updated. That data can be multiple, like multiple records. So for each one of those records, we are going to do the mapping into the engagement cloud. We'll call the engagement cloud, function or interface. And we'll do this for each one of the records. Once the records are done, we are going to map the response from engagement cloud to the initial body or initial request, and then send it back. Now let's see what is the error that this is flashing over here. If I highlight the errors over here, you will see it says missing primary business identifier for tracking. Oh, so obviously, since we are going to call this integration flow multiple times, we need to understand how each one of these integration flows is going through. Is it successful? Is it not successful? If it is not successful, what was the issue? So we need to do something called tracking. And let's just click on this, click on tracking. And what it will show me is all this data element that's available to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up this subscription product PUID. Remember, that comes from the URI itself, and I'll drag and drop this over here. And that becomes my primary tracking field. We will see how this helps us. We save this, all the errors are gone. So save the integration flow and close it. You will see that in the list now, there is a new integration flow that is created, which is the current one that I was working on, called update bill lines 3. And I go and activate this. Now, activate essentially means we are deploying this integration flow. Remember that this is basically modeling that we have done. The underlying integration engine interprets this particular model. So once we've sort of created this model, we need to let the integration engine know about it. That's why we would do a deployment. But before we are deploying, we are enabling tracing. What it means is that we are essentially going to see each and every one of this integration flow invocation. And for each one of them, we will also get to see the request and response payload. I'll go ahead and activate this. And once I have activated this, you will see that it tells me that it has been submitted for activation. I can click this. I see that it is still action in progress. I can go and refresh over here. And I can see now that this is active. So to test this is very simple. You could, of course, use tools like Postman, for example, because all this is REST. But in the tool, we have testing as well. So you can click on this run button and you can click on this test. Now see that there is metadata URL available. So if I open this metadata URL, we will see some details, but let's click on testing over here. Okay, so while that, let's look at what the metadata URL shows me. The metadata URL enables me to see Swagger representation as well as Open API representation of this particular REST URL. So this is what your application will actually invoke, right? Let's test, test console. So as you remember, we need to provide the subscription product PUID, and then we need to provide test data over here. So my test data, this is the subscription product here, and then I go into the box and I paste my test data, and we click on test. Now what it has done is it has given me response here. This is the integration instance. So if I click on this, it will show me how many times this for loop has iterated, the mapping has been done successfully, etc. If there was any error, by the way, this would turn red, and then you could check, what that sort of error was. As you can see over here in this particular console itself, when I do the testing, so let's do that test again. It also shows me an activity stream of what exactly has been happening, right? So, and if you want, you can download JSON or CSV of the activity stream, and you can, sort of analyze it offline. So to make a call into this particular REST URL, what you will have to do is use this. So this particular, the REST URL from your application, as I mentioned, you provide the subscription product PUID, and then you can also provide, the JSON body. What we also help you with is curl over here. So we automatically generate the curl example for you, and I can go ahead and copy this. And let's see if I run this from command line. Let me bring this down. Okay, widen this. Okay. All right. So let me just go back and look at if that's successfully processed. So I go into integrations. I go into monitoring, go into integrations and integrations. And I can see that there was a second, okay, this invocation I don't think has gone successfully because both these are from the test console. The curl one probably failed. I'll check what the reason for that could be. But you essentially should be able to identify here that this is the URL that we use. So here, the last part, sorry. So you can see that the REST URL with the with the resource URI over here, and this is the JSON body that I have provided. So you can use the same thing for Postman, for example. And I remember what is missing here. What is missing is the authorization, which I have not provided, and which obviously the test console does not automatically give you. The same curl patch. Let's see. And Actually, just I will copy paste this. I'll add a -v over here. This has failed because of authentication error. How much time we have? We have still 5 minutes, so I'll just wrap up. Done. All right, so let's see. So if you see over here, yeah. So this is what the problem is. It's asking for basic authentication, and you can see here that there is a 401 that has been returned to the to curl. Okay, so let me wrap up quickly over here, and let me reshare my presentation. Okay, so what we basically saw in the demo was I set up the adapter to Engagement Cloud. Well, I showed you how to set it up. There was one already set up, so I didn't want to create a new one. But I showed you various adapters that could be set up. I showed you one for REST, one for Engagement Cloud, and one for Kafka. We created an integration flow. This integration flow exposes a REST URI that your application can call. And that application can call it with resource URI as well as with body that actually needs to do some work. And we implemented the HTTP patch verb. Of course, we could do get, post, etc. as well. And not just that, but we also deployed this particular integration flow. We tested it, and we sort of saw how you could test it in various other tools. So I showed you curl. Of course, I had not provided the authentication, and that's why it failed. But you could take the same curl body and post it into Postman, provide your username, password, and that would work for you. So what is integration? Why is this so important? If you look at every one of the projects that you're doing, which is targeted for digital business or digital transformation, integration is the core for that particular project. And any analyst report that you look at will tell you that integration is the key for these projects. In fact, 50% of time and cost is being spent on integration work. And that's where we bring like a very rich adapter library that covers multiple technologies, multiple SaaS, multiple on-prem applications, and data sources. It makes it quick for you to create any sort of integration. And not just that, but you can also do application data mapping. In fact, in some of the cases, we can actually recommend how the source data maps to the target data. And the way we do this is we constantly do machine learning in the background. So that is how we are able to identify what is the data mapping that would happen. And this is what becomes very, very important when you are trying to deliver a project. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is also we have an embedded file server within this particular product. So if you need to integrate, or if you need to generate files and make them available in an SFTP server, or you need to provide an SFTP endpoint for others to send files to you, well, there is a 500 GB built-in file server, which is sort of free of cost. It's part of the subscription. All you need to do is activate it. And once you've activated, you have an SFTP endpoint that you can then publish to your partners, or the other customers who want to transfer files. Or to summarize, we've built a tool, we've built a product that we believe is giving you huge advantage in terms of the entire productivity around a particular project by creating pre-built connectivity to applications, data sources, etc. We also have ready to run recipes, and the resources that I share, you could look at them and try and see more details about all these features. You can see a demo. You can do hands-on by yourself. We are the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for these are the resources. Some of them are just about what they talk about the feature functionality. You can have an avatar guided demo. There are customer successes that you can take a look at. But more importantly, if you're interested in more of this particular product, you can look at the training link as well as some hands-on that we provided. In fact, the demo that I have used is from the hands-on lab that we have available. There are solution books and solution outlines which you can take a look. With that, I bring a close to my presentation and hope this has been useful for you. Back to you, Joanne.